Welcome back. Nigeria stands to lose up to 20% of her external reserves or 2.5% of her gross domestic product if last week's $9 billion judgment debt ratified against her by a British commercial court is executed. Again, there have been reports that President Buhari's new set of ministers, all 43 of them, would in the next 4 years collectively earn a total of 2.53 billion naira, putting the spotlight back on the question of whether Nigerian public officials are indeed being overpaid for doing what is often considered as so little in the public interest. How much effort is being made by the government to really win back the confidence of foreign direct investors? How empowered are local individual concerns in terms of seizing global opportunities? And how healthy is the country's macro or micro economy, rather? So for more questions and answers, we are now being joined by Dr. Nicky Okoye, a former chairman of Trade and Investment Commission of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, co-founder of Transcorp Plc, former chief strategy officer of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and financial consultant and global investment advisor with Merrill Lynch. Now, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, convener of the Nigerian Leadership Summit and currently chief strategist for the Nicky Okoye organization and chief executive for the Annabelle Group. He will also be telling us about the $60 billion fund being supported by the United States government as part of its Prosper Africa initiative. Welcome to the program. That's such a full profile. I was losing my breath.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okoye, good to see you again. The last time I saw you was when you were doing the Nigeria Leadership Summit.
Absolutely.
You mobilized so many young Nigerians to mentor and motivate them.
Yes, we had a large
Let's
turnout.
start with something very topical. The presidency is having a retreat for ministers designate. And we had before your arrival on set, Mr. Bismarck Rewane of financial derivatives. And we had asked him a question about his expectations. What will he think that the next Minister of Finance will do? But then he opened up the question and said, no, he would rather express concern about the fiscal team, the disconnect between fiscal policy and monetary policy, and the CBN using monetary policy to promote fiscal policy having been one of the problems we've had in the last 4 years.
Yes.
So I pose the same question to you. What are your expectations? What do you think should be the way forward? Because this alignment between the two sides would have serious implications for economic performance.
Well, absolutely. I think, first of all, the team needs to figure out what is the agenda. And I read the president's speech at the retreat yesterday, and I didn't get the confidence that he set an agenda. He talked about building teams. He talked about 3 major initiatives that his government has achieved so far. But what is the agenda? And I think the agenda should be job creation. If you look at the challenges of the Nigerian nation, up to now, and previously over the last 10 years, I would say, we are building we have a huge crisis that is growing amongst the youth population. We have a large youth population, one of the largest youth populations in the world, if you calculate it based on per capita. And we're not preparing ourselves for these youths. So you have millions of young people coming out of university every year, and there are no jobs to absorb them. Then you have millions more that don't even have an opportunity to go to university, and there are no jobs to absorb them. And when you have young people that are not doing anything, the result is crisis, because they're going to get involved. They have to eat. So they're going to get involved in all kinds of crime. And that's why we're experiencing the kind of insecurity that we're experiencing in Nigeria. So if the administration can take job creation as its focus, then everything falls in line. Because if you're talking about job creation, then you now start asking yourself, as a Minister of Finance or a governor of a central bank, what should I do that would help creation of jobs in Nigeria? The first thing, of course, people do a lot of what they call Buy Nigeria rhetoric. It's all about a rhetoric. Nobody is really serious about implementing a Buy Nigeria strategy or Made in Nigeria strategy. But if I was to implement a Made in Nigeria strategy, if I was a Minister of Finance, first of all government procurement must be bought from goods and services that are made in Nigeria. And government procurement is the lion's share of all spending in Nigeria. Both local government state government as well as the federal government. And when you say government procurement, I'm talking about all kinds of things, from cars to pens to exercise, materials to, everything that government uses, basically. If you look at government procurement, you'll find out that a lot of things are imported that can be produced in Nigeria effectively. That alone, you're talking about over, 500,000 to 1 million jobs could be created if all levels of government have a Buy Nigeria policy. Then you take it the next level. What else do you need to do to create jobs? You need to encourage entrepreneurship. You need to encourage businesses. What do businesses need? First of all, businesses need an enabling environment to operate. It's not rocket science. When you go to a typical public officer in many of the Nigerian ministries, and I'm talking both state and federal, you have this situation as if public officers are in competition with the private sector. And they don't understand that they're not in competition with us. Their job is to make sure the environment is conducive for the private sector to flourish and to grow. Because we are the ones who create jobs for the citizens. And it is after we have created those jobs that the economy and the country continues to grow. Job creation is not a responsibility of the federal government or the state governments. Their job and their responsibility is to create the environment. The private sector's responsibility is to create jobs. But you cannot create jobs if the environment is unconducive.
Absolutely. We do need to create an enabling environment. That is facts of the matter. And one recent take on the entire Buy Nigerian notion is the Forex ban on food importations that we've been discussing pretty much all morning. But I want to take a different angle to that as well, which is the fact that a huge discussion that's come up around that is the independence of the CBN. The former deputy governor of the CBN, who also ran for office, Kingsley Moghalu, came out to express his concerns about the lack of autonomy with the Central Bank of Nigeria and the infiltration of this government, or influence rather, on the CBN. What is your take on that? What effect do you think that is having and could possibly have on the Nigerian economy?
Yeah, I think what is happening with the government policy, first of all, the central bank is supposed to be an independent institution with respect to monetary policy. They're supposed to be in charge, and they're supposed to, adjust it as it relates to development or economic progress, if you will. Where the president does not and should not be dictating, especially not publicly, to the Central Bank of Nigeria. It gives the international community the
puppeteering.
They get concerned, if you will, that the CBN is not independent. So it's like there's a puppet master somewhere dictating things. So that's wrong. But you would agree with me that the intention was right. They have an intention to promote Nigeria, but there are certain areas of production that Nigeria is not ready, okay? And like anybody would say, if you look at food is a very large, broad perspective. I mean, food, you have processed food, you have finished food, so what area are they really referring to? I don't think there's clarity on that. I think when the Minister of Finance takes office, he or she will probably provide more clarity on what the president was trying to achieve as far as that policy is concerned. There's a lot of areas that you could actually get much more mileage, if you went after those areas where Nigeria can actually do much better as far as production is concerned, as opposed to the areas that he's concerned about. So staple food items, we're producing a lot of them, so we're producing rice, we're producing gari, and so on and so forth. In fact,
cassava.
The amount, exactly, Nigeria is the #1 producer of cassava in the world. But the amount of demand, we're not actually meeting our demand in some of the food items. So even if you ban them tomorrow, for instance, palm oil, we have a large production base of palm oil.
All taken out the country.
Yeah, we actually import more palm oil than we produce, because we're not producing as much as the demand is. And that's because we haven't set up the factories to do the processing of the palm kernel that we have. And some of the palm farms, if you will, that, used to, if you go to the Niger Delta area and the eastern part of the country, you find out that a lot of the palm farms have been abandoned, those plantations. Many of the trees there are 60, 70 years old, so nobody has reinvested in that particular industry. So there's a lot of the areas where we can actually get some quick benefits if we redirect. If the intention is to ensure that we buy Nigerian, which means create Nigerian jobs, then we need to look at the policy properly and do it right. But just coming out with a holistic ban on food items doesn't really tell me that, and I guess it's because the Minister of Finance is not yet in place. So,
well, I mean, I would like to ask a follow-up question, although we'll go on a break shortly. And this has to do with the point you were making about government procurement, about economic patriotism, about protectionism. How feasible do you think that is, considering that we have an issue with lack of capacity within the Nigerian economy and also a low level of competitiveness? But we'll take, your response when we return from this short break. Well, we still have a little time, but, I'd wanted a situation where you reflect on that, and then when we come back, you can address it.
Okay.
Yes, we'll be right back. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in the studio is Dr. Nicky Okoye, the president of the Annabelle Group and convener of the Nigerian Leadership Summit, former strategy officer with the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Now, before we went on break, I had wanted you to comment a little further on the point you made about government procurement and protectionism. And I asked that question in the light of the fact that, look, if we're talking protectionism at a time when we want to engage with the rest of the world, with some of these initiatives coming up, you have the Prosper Africa Initiative, worth $60 billion. You have the China Belt and Road Initiative. You have, in the face of a no-deal Brexit, you have Britain trying to look for new trade zones, new partners, new levels of engagement. And then yet you say, protectionism will work for us. And then, of course, we also have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So will protectionism work in the light of all these, developments on the global stage? And how can Nigeria really position itself in all of these contexts instead of talking about economic patriotism?
Great. First of all, protectionism is not buy Nigeria. Buy Nigeria is not protectionism. Every country in the world operates a local strategy to buy local products. That's what local content strategy is all about. So when we say we should buy Nigeria, we're not saying protection. In fact, I am an advocate that we should, get rid of protectionism. Protectionism makes people lazy. When you protect companies, they become lazy, they become inefficient. One of the when I was chairman of the Trade and Investment Commission of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, I actually had an opportunity to go around manufacturing sites across Nigeria. I went to Onitsha, Nnewi, Aba, Kanu, and the ones here in Lagos, both in Isolo and Ota, and so on and so forth. And one of the things I found out is that Nigerian manufacturers at that time had obsolete equipment. Some of them had equipment that were 30 years old, 40 years old. In the international community, once your equipment is 10 to 15 years old, you change it. Everything gets changed, and you start off with brand new equipment. You cannot produce effectively and competitively any product in any manufacturing line if you are using obsolete equipment that breaks down, equipment that provides for inefficient and uncompetitive production. And that's the problem that Nigeria faces, and that's what protectionism does. It makes you lazy, it makes you inefficient, and you just keep managing. So that's not what we're advocating. One of the greatest advocates, I would say I was one of the greatest advocates for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, because that is what allows us to go out into Africa, go out into the world, and compete with our peers. There are so many African countries across the continent, especially the Francophone countries, that import things as insignificant as toilet paper from France. And if we can produce sophisticated products at this time, I'm sure we can produce toilet paper that Senegal or Gambia or Cameroon can use. So the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, what it does is that it allows Nigerian companies to compete across Africa in every product without the tariffs. So when you are competing without tariffs, it means you're going to be much more competitive than your European competitors. So there are areas where we can compete. Now, the great news is that some of the international countries like the United States, Europe, even China, have realized that Africa is expanding amongst itself. The opportunities are growing. The Continental Agreement gives access to a $6.6 trillion market when you use purchasing power parity to calculate it. That simply means that African businesses are going to have opportunities. So United States of America have put aside about $60 billion in what they call the Prosper Africa Initiative. Their goal is to increase business with the United States so that United States suppliers can supply more equipment, more technology to African companies. But for us, our goal would be, let's modernize our factories, let's get this money, put the factories together, and then we can supply to the rest of Africa. And that is why our organization, the Nicky Okoye organization, we have headquarters in Washington, D.C. We're actually organizing roadshows and retreats, taking executives, state government officials, federal officials, and entrepreneurs to the United States to meet with the folks who are managing this $60 billion and find out how many factories, how many companies can we support. Let's position Nigerian companies to get this money and be able to reposition themselves for the Africa's free trade area. Some of the unusual companies or entrepreneurs that are taking advantages are even in the healthcare industry. You find out that Nigerian hospitals, especially some of the best hospitals in Nigeria, in Lagos or in Abuja, don't have all the equipment necessary. I mean, MRI machines, you can count on your hand, one hand, how many MRI machines are in Lagos or in Nigeria as a whole. You know, so this Prosper Africa becomes a huge opportunity for the medical industry. Anybody who wants to upgrade their facilities can access these funds. You know, it's huge for the energy industry as well. Those in power, those who want to purchase, you know, sophisticated metering equipment, smart meters that the government is now insisting. You don't want to do estimated billing anymore. You want everybody to have smart meters. You have opportunities to acquire that. And you can acquire it in breakdown parts and do the assembly here in Nigeria. So it gives an opportunity for industrialization as well. You know, so I think that what we need to do is we need to be strategic. We need to figure out what are our goals. And I said at the beginning, our goals should be job creation. Now, what do you need for job creation? You need the right policies. You need the capital. So the right policies we talked about, which is Buy Nigeria or Africa Freedom Trade Opportunity. You move out, expand your market base across the African continent and across the world. So we shouldn't just focus on just Africa. But then you need the capital. Where's the capital going to come from? And I believe the capital can come from initiatives like the Prosper Africa Initiative, supported by the United States government. The European Union has the European Union Investment Plan, which is supporting Africa with about 40 billion euro under the New Alliance for Jobs and Growth with the African nations and African businesses. And then, of course, like you said, the China Belts and Road Initiative is huge. But we need to get China to start focusing more on businesses as opposed to government, because a lot of China's support is government to government. You know, but with Prosper Africa and the European Union Investment Plan, it is not government to government. It is actually focused on businesses, so business people can take advantage.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Speaking of capital as well, move us on something that is a bit off topic, but still there. It's in the news of recent. MTN shares are now closing in on Dangote shares on the Nigerian Stock Exchange to become the most capitalized company. What's your take on this?
Well, MTN is already a global company, as is Dangote. Dangote is across Africa. So I think it's a good phenomenon. I don't think you want to have one tree in a forest.
Yeah.
You know, so I think we need to grow more Dangotes and more MTNs. So if MTN is growing and is getting to the point where it's going to outcompete, I mean, before Dangote came to the stock exchange, when I was there, I was chief strategy officer at the stock exchange. It was Nigerian Breweries that was the largest company for a long time. And then, you know, we went and tried to convince Dangote to come and list on the stock exchange. I remember all those meetings. We had, my department alone had over 17 meetings with Alhaji Dangote, you know, and trying to explain what it requires to list, why he should list, and what the value of listing would be for him and his group. And everything we said has happened, you know, because without that listing, Dangote would not have been referred to as the richest man in Africa.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's look at another topical issue, which is the recent judgment from a British commercial court against Nigeria in the matter between Nigeria and a company called Process and Industrial Development Limited, with Nigeria now, you know, having before it a judgment debt of $9.6 billion. And this has generated a lot of anxiety, understandably, among Nigerians. Do you think that the outcome of that case, even at this point, is likely to affect our credit rating? And if it is enforced, is it likely to have implications for maybe another round of recession or the implementation of the 2019 budget? What do you think will be the effect?
First of all, I think that we're going to have to appeal the ruling. It's unfortunate. I read the reports, and it was unfortunate that Nigeria did not put up a showing at the case. That is the information that was provided in the press. Now, I don't know what the thinking or the strategy was behind that. We have this laid-back attitude in Nigeria regarding when it comes to government and on legal cases. If you go through the Attorney General's files and all the judgment debts that has been placed against Nigeria, you find out that 90% of them are due to complacency. You know, Nigerian government is not putting up a good defense or a good showing. Sometimes they don't even show up. You know, and in this case, I heard they didn't show up. So it means that they now need to, if not for the press, they probably would not have taken this matter as seriously as they should. So now the press has made it front page news. So congratulations to you folks. And then the government now needs to take it seriously. So I believe there's an opportunity to appeal. The initial judgment was actually an arbitration. So it was the arbitration debt that the judgment is passing on. And in anybody who doesn't understand the arbitration means that two parties agree to, if there's a dispute, they get a single arbiter or sometimes three arbitration members in a panel. And these folks are not courts. They now decide on the dispute. So the dispute, the arbitration panel awarded it in the favor of this company. And it is that panel's implementation or enforcement of that panel's decision that the court was ruling on. So not on the substantive issue.
Yes, I know.
So a lot of people might not know that. So we now need to figure out, or maybe even go back to the negotiation table with these folks. There are quite a number of options that are open to Nigeria. I mean, they can go back to negotiation with these folks. And because 9.6 billion that's ridiculous. I mean,
it's a bit of a joke.
20% of external reserves.
Exactly.
Anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Nicky Okoye. We've enjoyed this conversation very much.
Thank you.
And I hope when next we invite you, you will also oblige us.
I'll be happy to.
Thank you very much indeed.